guy's a talented guy. I don't care where he's played. He could have played, for the most hateful, worst team in the league, and I'd like to have him on my team if he's a guy that's going to help me get to the Super Bowl. Because at the end of the day, that's what it's really about. It's not like Tom Brady comes in with a bad reputation. He's a bad guy, does bad things in the locker room. So if the thought of not bringing him in because he thought Colts fans would be up in arms because he's a former Patriot, I hate that thought because I want the best guy at that position leading my team to try to get him to the Super Bowl.
No, I could agree with you more. But at the same time, let's shift on over to the Colts, and we'll get into some of these other NFL free agencies that has happened this week, because clearly that's all that's happened at all this week. We'll get into Phillip Rivers here in just a second. But the Colts also, I thought, made a pretty smart move when they acquired defensive tackle, did the trade with San Francisco for DeForest Buckner. I think he's a very, very solid player that fills a role that we need to do, and also, the re-signing brain fart, but also the re-signing of Anthony Costanzo was all good, solid plays by the Colts. And DeForest Buckner is going to really add a lot, and we need some help on our defense. So maybe they're not patching all the holes, and maybe there's still a lot of things that need to happen for the Colts. But there have been some pretty positive moves here in the offseason with the Indianapolis Colts.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see how the thing with DeForest Buckner works out. It's so not like the Colts to A, make a trade for a guy of that caliber, and B, to pay somebody that kind of money who wasn't previously on their team. So that's an interesting move. But, I think there are some major holes still in this team that they have to address, and hopefully not just try to address with rookies from the draft. So, we'll see going forward what happens. But it's been some interesting moves and out of character for the Colts so far.
So and I texted this to you yesterday, but CBS has new odds, if you will, of teams that can win Super Bowl 55. They've got the Indianapolis Colts at 25-1. So, no, we don't expect to win the Super Bowl, but we've got Phillip Rivers for 1 year. And I say let's be positive. Let's see the silver lining of it all. I mean, he's always been right at 500. Now that's just a mediocre quarterback, but he's also been with the San Diego Chargers for 13 years. He's been with the San Diego Chargers the same amount of time Eli Manning has been with the New York Giants. And even though Eli Manning won a Super Bowl, you take that away from Eli Manning, and you look at the two quarterbacks, I think they're very, very similar. I think that Phillip Rivers is a great Band-Aid. He's not the cure. And that just kind of tells me that they might be looking to draft a quarterback in the draft and make him the number 3 quarterback. And he sits behind Jacoby Brissett and Phillip Rivers. And I think, in my opinion, they brought Phillip Rivers on for more than just the hey, let's get to the playoffs or let's win a Super Bowl. We're building from the draft. That's always been Chris Ballard's theme. We're building from the draft. And if you want to get a good caliber, we're not going to get one of the big caliber quarterbacks. But if we're able to get a solid quarterback in our first pick in the NFL draft, and you've got 2 very seasoned people to bring him into the fold, Phillip Rivers may look like to be a very, very good choice when it's all said and done.
Well, I mean, the problem with Phillip Rivers in that aspect is he's never been a guy who's been very cordial to his backup quarterback. When San Diego had brought in some younger quarterbacks, they wound up moving out because Phillip Rivers didn't have any inclination to want to teach them or work with them more than just what he had to and was required to. So in that aspect, he's never proven that he can do that successfully. And if you look at the weapons that he had in San Diego last year, which was much more plentiful than the Colts, he had his worst season to date, lost some arm strength, threw more turnovers and interceptions than he had in his career in any season. So that's what bothers me at that point. If we're going to bring in a young quarterback, that's fine. I think the Colts would be well to draft Jalen Hurts out of Oklahoma and work with him over the next couple of years to try to see if he's got what it takes to be an NFL quarterback. There are so many reasons I don't like the Phillip Rivers move. I don't feel like the Colts doing that makes them contend for a Super Bowl unless he completely turns around what he had last year. But now he's going to have to do it with less weapons. You know, if you look at that receiving core and the tight end core and the running backs that San Diego had, he had a pretty stacked offense and just couldn't get the job done. So it's concerning to me that the Colts are looking towards 2021, 2022 as opposed to looking towards this season.
You know, we were talking about bad blood between Tom Brady and the Indianapolis Colts, and you know, when Phillip Rivers first came to town, a lot of fans were going crazy because there's bad bloods between Phillip Rivers and the Indianapolis Colts, especially if we remember back a few years ago when he was in town and he was yelling at fans from the sidelines and that sort of thing. So there's some fan bad blood with Phillip Rivers as well.
Yeah, you know, and he's not the Peyton Manning, Andrew Luck type of leader that the Colts are used to, and that'll be a different thing for the offense and that locker room in the huddle. He's a much different type of leader. He sulks on the sidelines. He's a fiery guy, but not in the same confident type of leadership I think that we had with Andrew Luck and Peyton Manning. So it's going to be a different dynamic entirely for this Colts team this year.
Shouldn't Colts fans get away from Peyton Manning? He's gone. He's done. Shouldn't Colts fans get away from Andrew Luck? He's not coming back. I guess the best way to say it is there comes a time you got to get over your ex. It's that time. The Colts have got to realize Peyton Manning has a statue, for God's sake, in front of Lucas Oil. He's never going to go away. Andrew Luck made his own decision to go away. It's time to move on. Not necessarily that Phillip Rivers is the next LTR, if you will, but he is certainly he's not a bad date. I don't think that at all. I think that and if we want to, he's certainly a quarterback that can win his ball games.
No, but it's like if you were married to a supermodel for 20 years and she was the greatest woman in the world and she dies, and all of a sudden you're bringing in, Jenny from down the block, it's a whole different thing. The Colts fans have been spoiled for 20 years with two of the greatest quarterbacks to play the game, and guys who weren't issues, who were great guys on and off the field, guys who rallied these teams to great heights. So after being spoiled for 20 years, it's hard to try to change. People tried to get behind Jacoby Brissett somewhat last year, but it isn't the same. And if you look at a person who's in their mid-20s at this point, all they've known being a Colts fan is phenomenal quarterbacks. It's hard to try to deal with that.
Okay, take that question a little bit further. Does anybody remember life before Peyton Manning as a Colts fan? I do. It wasn't very pretty. It wasn't very pretty. I mean, does anybody actually remember Jim Harbaugh being the comeback quarterback for the Indianapolis Colts? I do. I mean, there was life before Peyton Manning, and there's going to be life after Peyton Manning. Not everybody gets to enjoy the dynasties that Tom Brady and the New England Patriots enjoyed. I talked with you a little bit about the draft and if they decide to go with a quarterback, and using my theory that they bring in Phillip Rivers for 1 year, they draft a young quarterback. They got Jacoby Brissett as the backup, and then they got the new draft as the number 3 quarterback. Let me run some names by you, and you tell me what you think. Jacob Eason from Washington, 1-year starter at Washington. I think it could be an option for the Colts at 34 if they decide to go with a quarterback. Again, going with my theory, and Eason transferred to Washington in 2018, sat out all the year, and then came during 2019 and put up some decent stats in 2019. What are your thoughts about Jacob Eason from Washington?
Yeah, I don't love him. He's a guy again without a ton of experience. And we've seen that be okay for a guy like Gardner Minshew, but he's not blowing the doors off anybody either. I mean, to me, the guy is Jalen Hurts, the guy who played at Alabama, played at Oklahoma. He's not a huge quarterback, but that's not the norm in the NFL anymore. He's a guy that's got speed. He can throw the football down the field, and he's been under the tutelage of two great coaches. you play at Alabama and Oklahoma at this point in where college football is. You played in a lot of meaningful games, and it's just, to me, that's the guy I think in the second round that would be my target if I'm the Indianapolis Colts.
What about Jake from State Farm? From Georgia. Jake Fromm from Georgia. Probably one of the most pro-ready quarterbacks ready to come into the draft and won't be selected in the top 10, put it that way. I think he's a good sleeper quarterback that the Colts should take a good hard look at.
Yeah, to me, he's probably the most Andrew Luck, Peyton Manning type quarterback in this draft. He's a kid who doesn't let a lot of things bother him. He's not the screamy, yelly Phillip Rivers type. He's just pretty even keel. But there were some games in the past couple of years. I've watched his kids since he played in high school, and you can go back on Netflix and watch a show called QB1 and watch him as he went through his junior and senior years in high school and went to Georgia. He's a kid with a lot of skills, but there's a couple of big games where he kind of disappeared, and that's the only concerning part for me. But he's a big kid. He's got arm strength. He's smart. And he doesn't let things bother him. And playing at Georgia, here's another guy who's playing a lot of big games. So yeah, he's a guy that I think would be a good pickup for the Colts as well. He's very Manning Luck-esque with his makeup.
This guy's still on my list. He was on my list before the combine. He didn't have such a good combine, but Jordan Love with Utah, I still think he's a good fit for the Colts, and they really need to look at him if they're going to draft a quarterback.
Yeah, I think that he winds up not making it out at the end of the first round. I think he's a guy that some of those teams who have older quarterbacks but who are still a good team would look at. He's a guy that I think would be intriguing to a team like Green Bay, to a team that's had a good quarterback who needs to find the next guy, maybe the Steelers. So I don't think that Jordan Love makes it out at the end of the first round. You're right. I think, he had a bad combine, but at the end of the day, to me, I don't give a damn what you did at the combine. I want to look at what you did in games. So game film is more important to me, and I think he's a guy that will wind up on a pretty good team as the backup for the next couple of years.
Let's talk a little bit about Jalen Hurts with Oklahoma. It's certainly, the closer and closer we get to the NFL draft, the more I hear Jalen Hurts and the Indianapolis Colts in conversations together.
Yep, that's my guy. Like I said, he played at Oklahoma and Alabama over the last 4 years, and that's a pretty good pedigree if you're a quarterback. He had a darn good season last year as well. Split time at sophomore and junior year with Tua. Has come back and won some big games for both teams. A dual threat quarterback, something that the Colts haven't had, in ever. So he would be a fun guy to see in the Indianapolis uniform with that offensive line, with his threat to run the football as well. I think Jalen Hurts makes the most sense out of anybody for the Colts.
Okay, one final thought of my prospects of 5 of good people that can be behind Phillip Rivers. Because remember, we got Phillip Rivers for 1 year, and unless something drastic happens, like he wins a Super Bowl or something crazy like that, I don't see them extending that. We got him for 1 year for $25 million. Maybe it was a bargain, maybe it wasn't a bargain, but this is the reality. We got the Colts, we got Phillip Rivers, and so I think. This is just my theory, but I think the Colts are going to be drafting a quarterback, and they're going to be building from the draft. So finally, let's look at Anthony Gordon from Washington State.
Washington State quarterbacks are hard to judge for me because that offensive scheme was so dynamic that everybody who's played in it has stood out, and not everybody has translated into an NFL quarterback. So Washington State quarterbacks are always so hard to judge because you don't know, is it the quarterback, is it the system? I guess, the jury will still be out. So anytime you see a quarterback from Washington State that's mentioned, to me, it's not that it's a bad thing. It's just it's always so hard to judge because that system was so dynamic there. I always reserve judgment to see how they fare in the first couple of years in the NFL. Not to say that he won't succeed, but it's a system, man, to where you look like a rock star and $1 million every time you play in it.
We've been talking with Mo for the BS Sports Show and our abbreviated show today. I was talking about the NFL free agency. We talked a lot about the Colts because it's kind of our homer card there. The guy I could remember earlier was offensive lineman Levon Clark, is who the Colts re-signed as well. Finally, we see the drop man himself up in Pittsburgh, and that's Eric Ebron headed to the Pittsburgh Steelers.